Welcome to the Friends Meeting House in Edinburgh. Situated on the upper bow, this is on the site of the old entrance to Edinburgh, a street traversed by Margaret Tudor in the 16th century and the Covenanters on their way to execution 100 years later. Tonight's event, hopefully a more peaceful one, is a discussion set up by the Edinburgh group of the Humanist Society of Scotland on the topic of evolution versus creation. The discussion is between Stuart Ritchie of the Humanist Society of Edinburgh and Paul James Griffiths, Mark Surtees and Phil Holden of Edinburgh Creation Group. Stuart is a fourth-year psychology student at the University of Edinburgh. Paul James Griffiths read ancient history and classical studies at the universities of Leicester and London. Mark Surtees has a first degree in applied biology and a PhD in zoology. Phil Holden is a graduate in computer science and a web designer. The chair is Juliet Wilson. We join the discussion as Paul gives his opening remarks.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting us to the debate this evening on the subject evolution or creation. I put here a better title would be evolutionism or creationism, and I'm going to explain the reason why about that. Let's just have a look. We as Christians here tonight believe in natural selection, adaptation, selective breeding and speciation. We understand that these are scientific principles and don't question it. So if this is evolution, then surely we are evolutionists tonight. However, there's some more. Evolutionism is the belief that all living forms have descended from a common ancestor by purely natural processes without any need of a creator. This could be an atheistic or a pantheistic, which is a pagan version, or what Richard Dawkins refers to as sexed-up atheism. That's the position there. And with both of those positions, both atheistic and pantheistic, I strongly disagree. Let's have a look at the roots of evolutionism, this philosophy. And a quotation here from Charles Darwin himself from Origin of Species. He says, until recently, the great majority of naturalists believed that species were immutable productions and had been separately created. This view has been ably maintained by many authors. Some few naturalists, on the other hand, have believed that species undergo modification and that the existing forms of life are the descendants by true generation of pre-existing forms. Passing over the allusions to the subject in classical writers, the first author who in modern times has treated it in a scientific spirit was Buffon. Then he goes on to say with a footnote, we see here, that is in Aristotle's physics, the principle of natural selection shadowed forth. In fact, Charles Darwin refers to Aristotle as being one of the classical writers who foreshadowed evolution thinking. But Aristotle himself is quoting from another philosopher called Empedocles. If we go back beyond, before Charles Darwin, he came to study medicine at Edinburgh University, and he was very much influenced by the Enlightenment movement of the 18th century. Here in Edinburgh, it was Dougal Stewart, a professor at the university, who gave the title to Edinburgh, the Athens of the North, because it was a revival of Greek philosophy. And where the Enlightenment ideas and the modern concepts of evolution were thrashed out were actually in the Freemason lodges in the city, particularly in the Royal Mile, and they became the powerhouse of the Enlightenment. One fellow, Lord Monboddo or James Burnet, many people regard him as the father of anthropology, he wrote in 1768 about human beings evolving from a common ancestor with the orangutan. And he had a direct influence as a Freemason on Erasmus Darwin, who was Charles Darwin's grandfather. Now, Erasmus Darwin wrote two books, Temple of Nature in 1794 and Zoonomia 1802. And they very clearly, if you read them, show the pagan philosophical roots of evolutionism. And as I mentioned earlier, they go straight back to the Greeks, thousands of years before Darwin. Thales was the father of naturalistic evolutionism in the Greek world. People like Democritus, Epicurus, and later the Roman Lucretius were influenced by him, believing that everything could evolve through natural processes. Pythagoras, on the other hand, who was contemporary with Thales, was the father of pantheistic evolutionism. Very influences came from India, from the Hindus, and this was a pagan influence. And people like Anaximander and Plato and Aristotle, to some extent, were influenced by Pythagoras. So you can clearly see the roots of where evolutionism comes from. In fact, there's Sir Monier Williams, a professor of Sanskrit, University of Oxford, in 1894, said, "Indeed, the Hindus were Spinozists 2,000 years before the birth of Spinoza, Darwinians centuries before the birth of Darwin, and evolutionists many centuries before the doctrine of evolution had been accepted by the Huxleys of our time, and before any word like evolution existed in any language of the world." Another person, Sir James Fraser, wrote a book and wrote an article called Some Primitive Theories of the Origin of Man. And he said, "The very lowest tribes have spontaneously believed in evolution. Thus the Iroquois have claimed their descent from the turtle, the Choctaws from the crawfish, the Utoak from the carp, and some Ojibways from the crane. Certain Peruvians, Eastern Africans, Malagasy and Chai-speaking tribes have all been equally convinced of their descent from lower animals, while the Aborigines of Western Australia and the Deri and the Runta tribes of the interior trace their lineage back to lizards, rats, parakeets, ants, emus, and trees." In other words, evolutionism, in this form, a pantheistic form, is very ancient and goes right back to the Stone Age. I'm going to skip over a few of these slides just a moment and get to the next bit. It's been that move on to the next bit. There was another person, Professor James Shapiro, who's a bacteriologist from the University of Chicago. He wrote a letter in which it said, "For those scientists who take it seriously, Darwinian evolution has functioned more as a philosophical belief than as a testable scientific hypothesis. This quasi-religious function of the theory is, I think, what lies behind many of the extreme statements that you have doubtless encountered from some scientists opposing any criticism of neo-Darwinism in the classroom. It is also why many scientists make public statements about the theory that they would not defend privately to other scientists like me." As far as I know, Professor Shapiro is not a Christian, he's not a creationist, but he's a professor of biology, and that's what he concludes. I would like to look then at creationism. And we are clear as Christians that creationism is a faith stance. You cannot demonstrate God creating the universe and life in the science lab. So I would say that evolutionism is a faith statement, though also is creationism. However, there is evidence, I believe, points to the biblical position. For example, it says in Genesis that the universe had a beginning. This was confirmed through the Hubble's telescope in the 1950s. Genesis also says that light existed before the stars or the suns. Also that the universe is expanding. And bear in mind that some of these references are about 4,000 years ago, long before modern science discovered them. We also discover in the Bible that time is relative. And we know, of course, that Einstein discovered that last century. We learn in the Bible that air has weight. That's why we have barometers and barometric pressure. That was mentioned 4,000 years ago in the Bible. We discover that the deep ocean has valleys and mountains, something that would be impossible for human beings to have known so long ago until we had modern submarines to go and actually look at the depths. We learn that in Isaiah and Job that the earth hangs on nothing and is a sphere, things which a lot of the pagans did not understand at all in those days. We also learn that in Genesis chapter 1 that information is the key to life, and this theme is repeated through the Bible. And we compare this, of course, with a modern understanding of DNA. The Bible speaks very clearly about adaptation, speciation, but with fixed baramins, that is, created kinds. That's the Hebrew word in Genesis. And so what it says is basically the dog family. You have whole varieties of dog within the dog family, or whole varieties of cat within the cat family. But to go from an amoeba to a molecular biologist through natural processes is something the Bible would not accept. And if you compare it with the fossil record, the Cambrian explosion, you find things ready-made, just as the scripture would indicate. My conclusion, therefore, For since the creation of the world, his, that's God's invisible attributes, are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. From Paul's letter to the Romans. And now I hand over to the other two who will speak from a scientific point of view. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I'd like to talk about the fossil evidence. I'd like to give you a quick overview of the fossil evidence and explain why it is more consistent with the creation and not consistent with evolution. And I'm going to start with a quote from Charles Darwin, which he wrote in 1859, when he said, "Why do we not find innumerable transitional forms embedded in countless numbers in the crust of the earth? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated chain, and this perhaps is the most serious objection that can be urged against my theory." Darwin is writing about the imperfections of the geological record, which undermines his theory. The explanation, he believes, lies in the extreme imperfection of the geological record, and he hoped that evidence would be forthcoming at some time. So let's jump forward to 2002. And here we have this quote from an evolutionist. "Given the fact of evolution, one would expect the fossils to document steady change from ancestral forms to the descendants, but this is not what the paleontologist finds. Indeed, the fossil record is one of discontinuities, seemingly documenting jumps, saltations, from one type of organism to a different type. So nothing has changed." That was Ernst Mayr, and the fossils are still missing in 2002, although he did go on to claim that there are some good examples of evolutionary transitions in the fossil record, but I don't have time to discuss these. But I would like to pick up on one problem that the evolutionist has, that is sudden appearance. And I've got two examples of sudden appearance in the fossil record. The first is the ichthyosaurs, which appear in the fossil record with no intermediates and no ancestors. They don't seem to have any ancestors or intermediates. The first ichthyosaur that we find is fully aquatic, and it's Eutapsiosaurus. And it's not significantly different from all other ichthyosaurs, and not by any stretch of the imagination is there a transition from a land creature to a sea creature. The other example, which may surprise you, is that of dinosaurs themselves. The first dinosaur is Aeroraptor, and here we have, instead of a simple creature, we have a creature with many advanced features. It was bipedal. It did not gradually evolve from a four-legged creature to a creature walking around on two legs. It also had three-fingered hands, just like the theropod, which is an advanced creature. And this creature was far too modern and caused problems for evolutionists because it was not primitive as would be expected for the first dinosaur, so the problem continues. Another example of a problem for the evolutionists is advanced creatures in the fossil record is Matophysis attenborough. The motherfish is an example of a modern fish in old rocks. Most fish lay eggs. Some fish give birth to live young, such as the sharks and the rays, and this is essentially an advanced feature. And here we have a diagram of the fish showing embryos and a yolk sac, all very advanced. And these advanced features are actually a great surprise to the evolutionists that discovered it. And in evolutionary terms, this fish is 400 million years old, and these features are just far too complex. We have a modern fish in the Devonian rocks. This is not what the evolutionists would have expected. And the problem goes on. If we go look at the fossil record, as we look through the fossil record, we find examples of what are called living fossils. Fossils that have been essentially unchanged throughout geological time. Through some 400 million years of not change from the same type of creature. So we have, again, a failure of the evolutionary prediction, and although attempts have been made to explain it, this is a major problem for the evolutionist. And the Cambrian explosion is another example of a problem, a big issue for the evolutionist. And here we have 30 phyla and subphyla all appearing in the fossil record in a period of 5 to 10 million years, which is an extremely short time in evolutionary terms, over 500 million years ago. Now, I don't accept the evolutionary millions of years, but there is a big problem here for the evolutionists, because where did all these creatures come from? Where are the transitional fossils? Where are the transitions to the various different kinds of fossils? Here I'm just highlighting 4 of the transitions between major groups of fossils where we just do not have transitions from one type of another. And this is another example of where the evolutionary prediction falls down. And the problems don't just exist in the Cambrian, they go on. But I don't have time to talk about birds, so I'm going to skip through this slide and the sequence of the fossils. I haven't got time to look at those, but I just want to conclude with a summary of the fossil evidence, why it is consistent with creation and does not support evolution. We have sudden appearance. We have no major transitions. We have advanced features far too early in the fossil record, which should not be there. We have what are called mosaic creatures. Archaeopteryx is a good example. I haven't got time now to go on to explain about that, but we can talk about that perhaps later. We have long-term morphological stasis in the rocks. We have only minor changes. And we have mass extinctions. All of these are not predictions of the fossil record, of the evolutionary theory. And I just want to finish with the warning that comes from the mass extinctions. This was, of course...
Sorry, you're on the slide, Stephen.
We'll start again. Mass extinctions. I just want to pick up on the mass extinctions. Here we have a record of the biggest mass extinction, which of course was the biblical flood, where only Noah and his family survived. And the fossil record is in fact a warning to us that judgment is coming, sin will be punished, but there is salvation in the Lord Jesus Christ. But we need to remember that there is judgment coming, and one day there will be the biggest mass extinction of all when Jesus Christ returns again.
Good evening. I'm a computer programmer, and one of the things that many people think about when they think about evolution is that common features means common descent, but that isn't actually true. Common features can equally mean common design. For example, my uncle is a potter. He makes pots. These are some examples of some pots he's made, and if you look at them, you can see that you could arrange them in somewhat like an evolutionary sequence of like apes turning into men. And yet we know that these were not produced by evolution, they were produced by my uncle. Now, if evolution was true, we'd expect to see a certain pattern in the genetics, when we look into the genome. If you imagine that A in that diagram is a particular kind of feature, and you can see that it's there on all the things at the top and none of them at the bottom. And what we could infer from that, if common descent was true, would be that these animals here descended from a creature which had gene A, yet A wasn't present down here, it evolved later. However, if creation is true, we would expect a different pattern, and that is that a creator, a designer, can include features wherever he wants to. So he can have features up here, and he can have them down here, without having them here, in between. And is this what we see when we look at externally what animals look like? Well, in programming, this is an example of a computer program. I can import libraries like color and font and things. I could use them in a package which was a spreadsheet. I could use the same libraries in something which was a computer game or something like that. And when we look in the animal kingdom, we find the same kind of things. Here's a duck-billed platypus. It has the bill of a duck. It has webbed feet like a bird. It lays eggs like a reptile. And it has venom like a snake. And it suckles its young. Well, do we see those same patterns when we look inside the genes of these creatures? Well, this is what the new scientist said. Darwin was wrong, cutting down the tree of life. For much of the past 150 years, biology has largely concerned itself with filling in the details in the tree. For a long time, the Holy Grail was to build a tree of life, says Eric Baptiste, an evolutionary biologist at the Paris and Marie Curie University in Paris. A few years ago, it looked as though that grail was in reach, but today the project lies in tatters, torn to pieces by the onslaught of negative evidence. Many biologists now argue that the tree concept is obsolete and needs to be discarded. We have no evidence that the tree of life is a reality, says Baptiste. That bombshell has persuaded some that our fundamental view of biology needs to change. The article goes on. Last year, for example, a team at the University of Texas in Arlington found a particular chunk of DNA in the genomes of 8 animals: the mouth, the rat, the bush baby, the little brown bat, the tenrec, the opossum, animal lizard, the African clawed frog, but not in 25 others, including humans, elephants, chickens, and fish. This patchy distribution suggests that the sequence must have entered each genome independently by horizontal transfer. So this is the pattern that we actually see when we look at the tree of life. Features, genetic features, appearing all over the place. The same kinds, the same pieces of code appearing in a scattered fashion. And does this happen in just a small percentage of the genome? No. In fact, by some reckonings, 40 to 50% of the human genome consists of DNA imported horizontally by viruses. That's saying you have a 50% chance, even odds of something appearing in the tree of life. And it's not just for junk DNA, if such a concept exists. Some of this DNA has taken on vital biological functions. Now, I'm a programmer. Here's an example of the simplest program you can write. It's called Hello World. If you look on the right, you see it's got a parameter, which is Hello World. On the left, it's got the command, which is to saying print Hello World. And if I click Run on that, then it prints out Hello World. You can see that at the top. Now, if I change the parameter, I can change it to just about anything, and I can click Run, and it will print it out, and the program will work fine. However, if I change the actual command, even just changing one character, and then I try and run it, the program breaks. There it says document.rip. It's not a function. That function doesn't exist. Now, our DNA is made up of things which code for things like parameters, say things like eye color. But then there's other DNA which are control genes. And I suggest to you that if you start changing if you start changing the genes which govern structure and things like that, you're going to end up with some big problems. Well, when we look at the simplest organism that we have, M. genitalium, it has a genome of 580,000 base pairs in it. This is before we have any evidence of self-replication. This is somewhat like writing a short novel just by tapping random keys on your keyboard and it making sense. Now, for me, it's a bit like the atheist saying Mother Nature did it. As creationists, we're accused of saying that God did it. Well, I think that this is what atheists are often saying. It's just Mother Nature did it. We'll find an answer somehow. We don't have one. Now, we find the same pattern when we look at the universe. It's not just self-replicating things that have this amazing structure. If you take the 40 constants which govern how the universe holds together, and you change them with just a fraction of a part per billion, you find that the universe unravels. David in the Bible says, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you're mindful of him? The Son of Man that you care for him? That's in Psalm 8. Now, Paul, Mark and myself, we claim that we know that there is a creator, but we go one step further than that. We claim that we actually know that creator. In the Bible it says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks the door will be opened. And that's an experiment that any scientist can do for themselves. Lord Lister was once asked, what's the greatest discovery that you've ever made? And he, I think, discovered chloroform, is that right? What was it discovered?
It was Simpson.
Simpson. He discovered chloroform. What was the greatest discovery that you've made? And people expected him to say chloroform, but he replied, the greatest discovery that I've made is that I am a great sinner, and Jesus Christ is a great Saviour. Thank you very much.
Around about there. Okay, my name's Stuart Ritchie, as I've said. I'm going to give you the case against creationism. Now, lest anyone think that I'm rather close-minded, I did make this slide. Oh no, not that one. I meant this slide, just in case the creationists tipped me over the edge somewhat. But I decided, but they haven't convinced me tonight. They haven't convinced me. I, like pretty much every working scientist in the world, think that evolution is supported by more evidence than most scientific theories have. It's one of the best supported theories in all science, and it's actually the fundamental premise for all biology, paleontology, geology, everything. you can't really understand any of it without looking at evolution. So, first of all, I'm going to talk about why creationism fails as a scientific theory, and then I'm going to go on to give you just a big pile of evidence for evolution. So we'll see where that takes us. So first of all, why creationism fails? Well, I think creationism is itself the very definition of bad science. When you say things like intelligent design, and you bring in concepts like that, these things are unfalsifiable. They don't mean anything. They're untestable. So when you can look at a structure in nature and say God did it, but then look at an entirely different structure and also say God did it, it doesn't really mean anything in science. It doesn't actually give you a testable hypothesis. You can't tell the difference, for example, between competing hypotheses, like was it aliens that did it or was it God that did it? Was it aliens from a different dimension or anything like that? This is just bad science, bad philosophy of science. Karl Popper, philosopher of science, said a theory which explains everything explains nothing. So if your answer to everything is God did it, it's not much of an answer really. It doesn't tell us anything. It stops science right there before we can do anything interesting and find out interesting things like evolution. So I think this pretty much, this cartoon pretty much sums it up. One of my particular favourite cartoons. Don't know if everyone can see that, but I think that's pretty awesome. So always takes a little delay till people read it, and then yeah, click. So let's go for some evidence for evolution then. We've heard some arguments against evolution. I'll try and maybe address some of them as I go along today, but in this, but mainly in the Q&A I'll respond to what the creationists have said. Here's my evidence. Basic evidence from looking at living organisms. First of all, you've got homology, right? It means similarities that all organisms share. Here's just one example of that. So we have the forelimb of some reptiles, mammals, birds here. They use the same bones, just squeezed and pulled into different ways and different positions. And it looks a hell of a lot like there was a common ancestor, and these bones have changed over a long process of evolutionary change. And you can see that the same structures are being used, and they've been helpfully color-coded in this picture. Now, either these have all evolved from a common ancestor, they're using the same bone structure, or God's playing a very bizarre trick on us. An engineer would not use the same bones and pull them into different positions. He would create efficient organisms using entirely different designs. So we've got this homology, and you can look at other things like brains, like circulatory systems, various other kinds of, and molecular systems too, and you find all these homologies within organisms. Only explanation is all animals and organisms are related. And indeed, the best homology really is DNA. All organisms on the planet use DNA as their basis for the genome. And you can line up DNA, and it's very, very similar in organisms that we think are close together. So our DNA is very similar to chimpanzee DNA, a little bit further away from gorilla DNA, and so on. And actually, not only that, but there are these retroviral insertions in DNA as well, which is particularly cool. Thanks to John for the diagram. And thank you, sir. So these retroviruses are a particular kind of virus which insert themselves into DNA, like HIV is one. Insert themselves into DNA, and they leave a particular signature, which you can find if you know what you're looking for, if you're a geneticist. And they insert themselves in entirely random points in the genome. So if you find two organisms with the same sets of signatures in their retroviral DNA, you know that they're related to each other. It's a system of common descent, and they actually fit a really, really elegant pattern. We have most of the same as chimpanzees. We have an extra family, which you don't find in chimpanzees, so we've obviously had an insertion since we split from chimpanzees. It's a beautiful way of seeing common descent, as if the DNA evidence wasn't enough. We move on to we talk about information in the genome. Creationists talk about that quite a lot. How does new information arise in the genome? Well, here's my particular favorite example of this. This is a fish. It's kind of an ice fish. It can live it lives in really, really, really cold waters near the Antarctic, and it doesn't actually have blood in the same way as other fish do. It doesn't have globin molecules in its. All other animals have hemoglobin that is their blood. This fish doesn't. It actually has ice water running through its veins. And it also, not only that, it's really thin blood, but it also produces antifreeze. This particular chemical that stops its blood from freezing. Any other fish, if you put it in those waters, would freeze solid, but these fish don't. It's an incredible thing. And actually, if you look at their DNA, you find that they have fossil genes for globin molecules. So they've obviously, their ancestors have been able to produce globin, and you can actually see that the gene has become degraded and it no longer produces what it originally did. And also, there's another gene which you can see has changed if you compare it to the genomes of other fish, which actually produces codes for the production of this antifreeze molecule, which is incredible. And you can read more about that, and Sean Carroll's got a good book about DNA, things about how the fittest actually happen. I mean, we're all talking about survival of the fittest. What's the making of the fittest? It's variation caused by mutations in DNA. And this is just one of the many examples of that. If you look at developmental biology, that is the development of embryos, you can see even more information, even more evidence for our evolutionary past. For instance, everyone in this room once had a tail. Everyone in this room once had gill slits, and also a fine coating of hair all over their bodies. Now, this has been overdone a little bit by evolutionists in the past. They've said that all embryos are exactly the same and whatever. That's not actually the case. But still, humans do grow a tail before they are born. Now, the only way you can explain this is that we have a common ancestor with animals which have tails. And sometimes babies are actually born with tails, easily removable, by the way, just so you know. It's taken off, no problem, not an issue. However, why did this happen? Why did God make that happen if it's not to try and trick us into believing that we evolved from animals that have tails? The only way you can explain things like that, evolution. We evolved from common ancestors who had these features. Okay, I realize this is a bit of a rush. Any questions you have about this, fire them at me in the Q&A. Fossils. We've heard a bit about fossils tonight. I can't remember when I started. How long have I had?
You've got 30 minutes left.
James, that's ages. Right, that's fine. Okay. I've had enough. I've had this stuff, I tell you. My goodness. Okay, we're often told that there are missing links, that we haven't found transitional fossils for a lot of transitions in the fossil record. So transitions being, you know, if evolution, we talked about this, the creationists talked about this, if evolution is the case, you'd expect to see, a gradation of fossils bearing, features changing into new features over time. Turns out that we do have loads and loads and loads of these. Before we start, just wanted to quickly make sure that people understand that evolution isn't a chain, right? It's not as if this monkey gives birth to this ape, which gives birth to a human here, which gives birth to a slightly more advanced human here. It's actually a bushy tree of evolution. So think about it like you would think about your genealogy. You have direct ancestors and you have collateral ancestors. So direct ancestors would be your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, and so on. Collateral ancestors would be, your uncle, your great-great-great-grandmother's sister, and so on. These people that are related to you, but aren't actually your direct ancestor. So think about this. Whenever we find a fossil, it's not necessarily a direct ancestor of the species that we see today, but it is. It could be related in some way. It's part of this tree of evolution. So it could be a collateral ancestor as well. So don't think about it like that. That's not really how evolution works. That's a kind of an unfortunate thing. That's whenever you see evolution, you see that diagram. Not so good. Not so good. It's a tree. Think of it as a bushy tree. So I threw this one in. This is actually from a different section. I sort of rejigged it when I saw Mark mention the Cambrian explosion. Unfortunately, Mark, you haven't been keeping up with the reading. Explosions. When was the last time you saw an explosion in the last 18 million years? Well, it's not normally how these things happen. We don't have loads of phyla appearing in the Cambrian period. Modern paleontologists actually know it as the Cambrian slow fuse. If you'd kept up with the reading, you'd have noticed that. We actually have some great transitions in the Cambrian. So life looked a little bit like this for 3 billion years. These are stromatolites, which are caused by mats of algae sort of thing, and life just looked like that for ages, and nothing much happened until you start to get it's really slow fade. you find all these complex multicellular creatures. I'm taking a wee jump here. There are transitions in between this too. But you find these in the Ediacaran fauna. This is actually before the Cambrian. You have all these fairly complex creatures, ones that kind of look a little bit like they could be related to trilobites. And then you find, once the Cambrian starts, you find loads and loads of these small shelly fossils, which is quite a cute name. And these are in the early Cambrian. And these get more and more and more complex. Paleontologists have got it all there. They've got all the fossils until you start finding things like trilobites, which are in the late Cambrian. The Cambrian explosion is not an explosion. No modern paleontologist will tell you that it's an explosion. We can maybe get back to that later on, perhaps. Okay, this is my favorite ever fossil. Paleontologists had found these complex fish with very bony fins from about 385 million years ago. They found tetrapods that could walk on 4 legs from about 365 million years ago. So they reasoned that if they looked in rocks, which are about 375 million years old, they would find something that is a transition between the two. And sure enough, on Ellesmere Island, they found Tiktaalik. Just spat everywhere when I said that. It's probably an occupational hazard of saying the name Tiktaalik. Tiktaalik is a fishapod. It's halfway between a fish and a tetrapod. Well, not half. Let's be exact here. It's a kind of a mosaic of features, as transitional fossils tend to be. Tiktaalik's a really, really, really cool fossil. I think it's quite charismatic. And it fits into... I know, I'm quite sad. Other people find people interesting. Anyway, so you've got Eusthenopteron here, which is a fish with these particularly bony fins. And you have Ichthyostega here, which is a tetrapod. And you can see that the leg is getting more and more and more complex. There were loads of different tetrapods around at that sort of time. We've got this bushy family tree. Remember, these aren't all direct ancestors of each other. It's a bushy family tree. This is a really... this is quite difficult, actually. More difficult than it looks, pointing at things. A recent paper here explaining, you can see from Eusthenopteron to Pandoricthus. Now, actually, Pandoricthus was found in Scotland, in Elgin, near Elgin, which is quite cool. I think that's pretty awesome. And so you've got this bushy family tree of fish to tetrapod evolution. Looks like we've got some great transitions there. Now, remember, they're not all direct ancestors. They're not. It's not a step from each one giving birth to each one and so on. It's a bushy family tree. We're not sure exactly where the species end and where they start, but we have all these, and they do get progressively more tetrapod-like as they get younger and younger and younger. I'm going to have to skip past this one. This is pretty cool though.
There are 7 minutes left.
Okay, that should be all right. This is Odontochelys, which is a turtle which had only half a shell, right? So it actually comes in rocks which are before we start finding turtles with shells, and after we start finding turtle-like creatures who don't have shells. So it would have looked a bit like that. It's got a shell just on its belly and not on its back. I think that's quite beautiful, really. Again, probably quite sad, but this is about 220 million years old. It's a really, really, really great example of a transitional fossil, just found last year. And this is Archaeopteryx. We've seen Archaeopteryx already. Archaeopteryx is again probably a collateral ancestor of birds, not necessarily a direct ancestor. Even though Archaeopteryx is spelt wrong here, you can see this is a theropod dinosaur. This is a compy from Jurassic Park, if you remember, and this is a chicken. Anyone that can look at that and not think that Archaeopteryx is a transitional fossil between the two is well, whatever. You can make your own conclusions. A creationist, perhaps. But so you can see that Archaeopteryx retains some features of the theropod dinosaur, like sharp teeth, and but it also has a tail, but it also has feathers and things like that, like a modern bird. So it's not actually a direct ancestor. Scientists don't think it's a direct ancestor, but it does fit into a rather excellent family tree from this paper here in 1995, which is pretty old. You should be keeping up on this sort of stuff, guys. So as you can see, Archaeopteryx doesn't actually lead to modern birds at all. Its lineage dies out fairly quickly. We stop finding them after this particular period here. And there are theropod dinosaurs which don't have any bird features that come after Archaeopteryx. This is fine. Evolution is a big bush. It's not a line getting more and more and more different all the time. It's not how evolution works. Another example of transition. And I'm going to skip fairly quickly through horse evolution. It's been known for a long time as a really cool transition. So creationists often will say, this is just variation within a kind. It's just a horse becoming a slightly bigger horse. No, you haven't obviously looked at the fossils if you say that, because there's major changes happening in the head of the horses, and there's major changing happening in their feet. Any paleontologist will tell you that. You start getting these orohippus, which are tiny little horses about the size of a dog, and we've got loads and loads and loads of fossils making this big bushy diagram of horses, which eventually end up in Equus, which is the horse we know today. And their diets change. That's what all these little leaves are. They become grazers and browsers and feeders and things like that. It's quite cute, really. And so horses, great transition. If you go slightly back from horses, you find a common ancestor with rhinos as well. Here is a Hyraceus, which is a fossil rhino, a common ancestor with the rhinos share. And you can see, again, this bushy pattern of evolution happening in rhinos too. It also is the same for camels. We've got great fossils for camels, great fossils for elephants, loads of dinosaurs we've got great fossils for, especially Triceratops is a particularly good transition. Loads of these. And they all fit in these bushy tree diagrams. It's not about one evolving from the other. I really have to hammer that point. And my favourite transition overall, my favourite fossil's Tiktaalik, as you know. My favourite overall transition is the transition for whales. Starting off with Pakicetus and moving on, we have a beautiful set of transitional fossils for whales. From this sort of wolf-like creature right down to something as we can recognise as a whale, and they all get younger and younger and younger. We can recognise similarities between in the teeth, in the ears, and in various structures of the knee. From Pakicetus to Ambulocetus, which is becoming more and more aquatic, and they get more and more and more aquatic as time goes on. They become more and more like a whale. If you line up the fossils, you can see the blowhole moving from the normal nose at the front and going right back up the top, becoming a blowhole. Incredible set of fossils. A lot of them have just been found recently, so a lot of the creationist books haven't kind of kept up with all this sort of stuff. But you can find out on the internet. There's good review articles being written for that sort of thing. Modern whales actually have a kind of pelvis that hangs about in their, not even attached to the rest of their skeleton. Again, how would you explain that if it wasn't a process of evolutionary change? And I mean, I can probably fairly quickly skip past this, but just to satisfy our species egoism, we have a beautiful set of fossils for humans too. This is a modern chimpanzee. We can see from the Australopithecines the brain getting larger and larger and larger and larger and larger, and various other anatomical details. This is just the skulls, obviously, but various other anatomical details change as time goes on until you get to the big-brained modern Homo sapiens here. A great set of fossils again. In fact, we've got so many fossils for humans we don't really know what order to put them in. It's just a bit of a mystery at the moment. People arguing about it all the time. But this is great. This is good science. Thank you. I'm almost done. In fact, yeah, I am done. So we've seen that all the best science. This is modern science. I'm showing you. This is what we understand from current work that's going on right now. Supports the theory of evolution amazingly well. So evidence from looking at living organisms, evidence from the fossil record, loads more stuff. If you want to know, ask in the Q&A. I've got stuff about biogeography, loads of other stuff which I could quickly talk about. Maybe you could respond to that, I don't know. Although I haven't ever heard a creationist respond to biogeography, so that'd be interesting. It's just such good evidence, they're just dumbfounded. And we've seen that creationism is religion-based, unscientific. You can't say God did it. No, it's fine. If you want to have that as your religious belief, that's no problem. I don't have an issue with that. However, don't say it's science. Don't answer questions just because you don't understand or just because the science isn't in yet. You can't say God. That's meant to be a Bible there that I'm bashing. And basically, the creationist arguments are so dodgy from their original premise right to the end. This is a kind of quote that pretty much sums it up, and maybe you should bear in mind tonight, if a creationist says the sky is blue, go outside and check. Thank you.
thank you. Thanks very much to all our speakers. It's very, very interesting. Well done to all of you. I'm sure there's going to be loads of debate questions. So what we'll do now is we'll go and have tea and coffee. There's so many of us here, so it might take a while, but if you could try and get your tea and coffee as quickly as possible, and we'll try and come back here and restart the debate at 9:45. So, I'm sure tons of you have got loads of questions. I know that our friends here, Paul, Mark and Phil, have tons of questions. I can see them scribbling all through Stuart's talk. So, what we'll do is, in a second, we'll take a question from them, a question from the floor. I'll allow Stuart to ask the creationist group a question, and we'll work like that and so on. So, if you put your hand up when you've got a question, when I come to the floor, I'll try and I'll try not to skip you if you're first in the queue. Just to let you know about our next meeting on May the 4th, Dr. Gary Dunn is going to be speaking to us. He is from the International Education Department of the University of Edinburgh, and he is the UN representative at the university. And he's going to be talking about something along the lines of humanist values in the 21st century and the UN and humanism. So I'm sure that'll be very interesting. That's on May the 4th at the usual time of 7:30. Okay? So, without further ado, who has the first question for anybody in our panel? Yes, lady there, please.
Given that the current scientific evidence points to the universe being 13.5 billion years old and the Earth being 4.3-ish billion years old, could the panel please explain where how old they think the Earth actually is? Because there was some mention about, I'll take the geological idea of what the Earth is, but it didn't seem that some of the creationists thought that the Earth was actually as old as people think it is.
Mark, why don't you go first?
That's very quick and easy to answer. I believe the Earth is 6,000 years old and the universe as well. Why? Why? That wasn't in the question, was it? Thank you. So it'll take too long to explain.
I don't really know what to say about that. I mean, there are trees that have more than 6,000 rings. It's definitely older than 6,000. And actually, I don't know if, probably you've all heard this, but if you're making the mistake that the Earth is 6,000 years old, you're actually making the same scale of error. It's actually 4.6 billion years old today. You're making the same scale of error as if you thought that the distance between New York and San Francisco was 7.6 yards, I think. So that's the sort of mistake that, well, either you or I are making. I tend to stick with the evidence that's been published in geological journals, not stuff that's written in the Bible. But fair enough.
Can I?
Well, let's move on. One of you have a question for Stuart.
Oh dear.
Yeah? Okay.
Hit me.
Stuart.
Hit me.
My question is, you said that intelligent design is untestable and meaningless. But my question is, what about forensics and archaeology, for example? In archaeology, we can distinguish between a normal flint and an arrowhead by the markings. So why not design in biology by information and codes?
Mm-hmm. That's fine. The thing is, we've all seen people make flint arrows and things like that. We can see. I could make you a flint arrow now. It'd probably be a bit rubbish, but I could make you a flint arrow now if we had a piece of flint. When was the last time you saw someone, make a fish out of nothing, or organise a bacterial flagellum, or organise a DNA code? You haven't seen that. It's not as if you can make the analogy. This is Hume. You can't jump to this sort of conclusion that it's an intelligent designer. This argument's been dead for years and years and years, and I can smell it rotting from here. It's just a poor argument. We've got good explanations for why these things happen naturally, and you can't make the jump to an intelligent designer like that. Not only that, just to say that it's not as if I'm talking about we might, a natural force has caused this, a natural intelligent force. You're talking about things that are supernatural, that are actually outside the universe, coming into this universe. I mean, how does something that's supernatural come in and invade the natural? How does that cause things to happen? When the designer is designing things, does he nudge atoms a little bit, or does he pick them up and move them, or does he change the physical forces? What does he do? How would you tell the difference between these things? It's impossible, because it's an unscientific, completely meaningless idea. That's my answer.
Next question from the floor, please. Sir.
One for the creationists. Flu virus mutates steadily. I know, because every year I get another one. And this process is explained pretty well by natural selection, I would have thought. Now, is creationism committed to the idea that every year God creates a new variety of flu virus? Either it's natural selection with our immune system as its selector, or it's the new creation.
Yes, you're quite right, it's natural selection. We have no problem, Paul actually said it right at the beginning, we have no problem with natural selection. Natural selection is an observable scientific fact. But if natural selection is evolution, then I'm an evolutionist. And I am, and I do say quite often to people, I'm a young earth creationist evolutionist, because I believe in natural selection, I believe in speciation. Happens all the time. The horse series that Stuart put up, I have no problem with that. That's horses turning into horses.
Yeah, you've not looked at any of the fossils, really, though, have you? Because
yes,
there are major changes happening in those organisms. Creationists say this sort of thing all the time. Funny how all paleontologists think it's a major change, the ones that have actually looked at it.
Stuart, do you have a question for the creationists?
Oh, where do I begin?
Fine, pick one.
I suppose we could start with the way you misrepresented New Scientist with their Darwin was wrong cover. It says in the editorial, if you'd opened up the cover, it says in the editorial, I hope creationists don't use this as a thing in debate. It really does. It really does. It really says that. I have the issue. It's lying at home. I should have brought it. I didn't realise that you would.
We've read it.
I didn't realise you would.
That doesn't mean we can't use it.
Now that. Okay. It doesn't mean you can't use it. But why do you think that? Why do you think that science advancing and changing means that evolution is false? It doesn't mean it's false. It just means that we're understanding different things about evolution. The New Scientist cover was saying that there's so much horizontal gene transfer going on in bacteria that it's not necessarily a tree like Darwin thought it was. That's not evolution being false. This is, the difference between your belief system and mine. Mine can change because of new evidence, and yours never does. Don't know what you have to say about that.
Can I come back on that one?
Yes.
Yeah. I think for me, before the issue of New Scientist, I was saying very much what was in there. And so for me as from a creationist perspective, this was what I was expecting to see when you looked in the genome. And so when I saw that issue of New Scientist, it was like, yes, this is kind of what I was thinking would happen, because I expected to see the same things that I'd see in computer programs in the genetics. And because genetics was a mystery what was in there up to that point. And for me, horizontal gene transfer is a bit of a fudge, especially when you say that 50% of the human genome has come in through horizontal transfer. That's half, which is even odds. It's saying that for any given gene, it could either appear to have come from some sort of common ancestor, or it could have come in through a sideways movement, and the chance of it being one or the other is exactly even.
The horizontal gene transfer doesn't happen in humans, it happens in bacteria, so it's a common ancestral thing that our DNA comes from that. So it's the same in chimpanzees, and it's the same in gorillas, and it's the same in orangutans and gibbons and things like that. They all have that. So it's actually an argument for common descent, because we all have this random noise in our DNA. I can't understand why that's an argument for creationism. I do not understand that at all. Sorry.
It's not random noise, that's why.
Oh, it's random noise. There's lots of random noise.
Question from the floor. David, you had one?
Yeah. I'm thinking that talking about whether the design thing is like falsifiable or not, I know that it's a bit, actually, two things here. I'll go with the other one first, right? I can either do this order because they're connected. I think, first I would say is the horse stuff. I do wonder whether anybody knows exactly what the criteria is for when something is a change within species, and when something is a change, from an entirely new species to another one. I mean, species are not, like electrons, where all instances of electrons are the same, pretty much. If not, there was some smaller particle when all instances really are the same, right? And there's no, thing about where there's no, I can't believe there's a line. So I suspect the debate about which is it that happens is fairly spurious. The second is, I note that though it might not be inconsistent with design, that things vary a little. Come to that, technically evolution is inconsistent with design, right? I mean, it's not flat out inconsistent with it in a logical sense, right? Even natural selection over long periods is incompatible. But it does seem like if you're looking for which one's predicting something and which one's absorbing new facts, which is always a good way to tell when one or other research program in science is doing well and another is doing badly. Evolution predicts that there will be these variations, even if you did have a criteria for species age and when it was speciation and when it was variation within a species, right? Evolution predicts that there will be both variation within a species and variation overall, if there is really a proper line between them. Whereas design certainly doesn't predict that. At most, it's not flat out inconsistent with design. But design certainly doesn't predict that. And indeed, once you start assigning some of the features to the designer, like being all powerful, it becomes those features certainly don't predict it. Maybe you could come up with a designer who would design stuff that would vary slightly, for the hell of it or something. But it's certainly not the designer described in Christian theology or anything.
Thank you, David. Sir.
You twice used the word for me. Can I ask you whether you could use the word for us? Do you all believe that the creation started 6,000 years ago?
Yes.
Are you speaking the same language?
Yes.
So was heaven and hell created 6,000 years ago? And did Homo habilis go to hell because he didn't believe in God?
We reject the big picture of evolution. In the Bible it says that death entered the world through sin, that death is a bad thing, and that we die because we've done things wrong. So at the point that Adam sinned, it says that was when death came into the world. So we don't accept the story of evolution. We don't accept that there were billions of years of death and suffering and disease before that event took place. That the reason that we have suffering in this world is because things are wrong. That God created human beings to look after the world, to rule over it. And when we disobeyed God and obeyed Satan, we've effectively handed that leadership over to him, and that's why we see suffering and death today. And that's why Jesus came, is to put that right.
One of the points that Mark made in his speech was that Judgment Day is a coming. When's that going to be? Why not yet? When's that going to be?
When's it going to be? We don't know, but we know that it will come. And the reason it's not yet come is because God is patient, and he's allowing time for everyone to repent.
And for everyone to suffer, presumably.
No, he's allowing time for you to repent.
Oh, right. Okay, that's fine. He's gonna have to wait quite a while in my case, I think.
He's very patient.
He's very patient.
I'll try and come to all of you. Just a chap at the back there. You start. Yeah.
Question for the evolutionists. There's a huge amount of evidence from diverse scientific fields, all converging to suggest that evolution is in fact true. But you assume that evolution is false. I'm just wondering, in principle, what kind of evidence would it take for you to accept evolution as true?
I distinguished at the beginning, for example, between evolution and evolutionism. As we said, for example, speciation, natural selection, these type of things. If that's evolution, we're full-blown, all three of us, full-blown evolutionists. No problem. But the difficulty we've got is what I distinguish between evolution and evolutionism, which I believe is a philosophy which is driving, is actually underneath, and using evidence, scientific evidence to suit itself, which people can do whatever they choose to do. I don't find the evidence I've seen scientifically to be convincing of evolutionism. That's my concurrence.
In principle, what kind of evidence would it take for you to change your mind?
Right.
Every person who accepts evolution knows the kind of evidence it would take to undermine the theory that's currently understood. So I'm asking you, what kind of evidence would it take for you to change your mind?
Yeah.
In principle.
I think that's in terms of evolution, it's in a sense unfalsifiable because we can't observe we can't observe these vast periods of time. So every time we find an anomaly like what they're attributing to horizontal gene transfer, they say, oh, it's this. Every time that something a new piece of information comes which doesn't fit with the story of evolution, it is infinitely elastic and accommodates that. It cannot be disproved.
It's not infinitely elastic. That's not the case at all. There's the whole thing about fossil rabbits in the Precambrian, which I would say. So if you started finding really complex creatures in really old strata, like really old strata, before these the Ediacaran fauna that I talked about, right? If you found a rabbit before that, evolution would be out the window immediately. That would falsify evolution right there. So there's one thing. If we started seeing creatures that had DNA that didn't use DNA as their genome, it would falsify evolution as we know it.
There are quite a number of creatures that don't use DNA.
Sorry, yeah, or RNA. My apologies, or RNA, which is viruses use. There are loads of things which could potentially falsify evolution, but the thing is, as all good scientists know, you don't chuck out theories that have been really good for explaining things. And evolution is, no matter what we will find, is still really good at explaining things like the horses here and various other kinds of transitional fossils. But you can adapt theories as they go along. That's what science is all about. It changes, the knowledge changes, and you don't chuck out a really good theory on one little tiny change. Now, maybe I've got a good question for you. Maybe after this, that I can ask you. The stuff about no, I've forgotten what I was going to say. You talked about at the start. God, I had a killer as well.
Somebody took it from you.
We'll come back to it. Does anyone from the floor have a question for Stuart? Yes.
Why are you so awesome?
Lady at the back there, yeah.
Let's say we could find the answer to that. We could agree. Let's say someone walks in the room and gives us a definitive answer to this. What my question is completely practical. Why does it matter?
Evolution matters because science matters, and science matters because if we start having people saying putting fairy tales in the place of science, then that's a really bad way for the future. For example, if you're teaching kids about creationism, they grow up and go to university and hassle the professors about a load of stuff. We don't understand, major facts about life. Now, knowledge, the pursuit of knowledge, is a really important thing, I think. And when you start bringing in, fairy tales and philosophical fallacies, like I can't understand it, therefore God did it. If you're teaching kids that that's a good way to think, then, you're going to get poor science done in the future. You're going to get a population who just doesn't understand basic scientific principles. Not only that, sorry? Well, there is that. Religion tends to be a bit mutable, so yeah. But my main point would be that evolution is useful for loads of other stuff too. It's useful in medicine. We can understand
like taking out thymuses
through evolution. What?
An example of evolutionary assisting medicine was about 100 years ago. Surgeons removed the thymus from babies because they decided it was a vestigial organ. As a result, the babies died. That was an example of how evolution is useful.
Okay, and what witnesses don't do blood transfusions?
Well, there's an example of how religion can be useful. No,
the best miracles that happen
not time, guys.
is the penicillin. The penicillin.
Yeah,
that's the best miracle happen.
You can watch bacteria evolve, resistance to drugs. It's all about evolution. There's loads of ways that evolution is really good at not only biological things, but evolutionary principles come into computing. They come into physics and psychology. Myself and Gary, who both work, who are interested. Gary particularly is a PhD student working with evolutionary ideas in psychology. They're really important for understanding why we think the way we do. Our brains is a really good way of understanding why our brains are so fallible, because they've been built up over a period of evolution. Memory, for instance, if an intelligent designer had designed our memory, he would have made it more like a computer. So we have exact ways of understanding stuff. Whereas our memories are really, really bad. They're prone to emotional interference. Flashbulb memories are terrible.
Can I just respond rapidly to what?
Go for it.
I mean, a lot of what you're saying is assuming you know how the intelligent designer will do something.
No, I'm just saying it would have been better. It would have been better.
It's not falsifiable or untestable if you don't assume that. So either you accept the point about unfalsifiability, untestability, and being unscientific, or you accept.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Anyway, but basically, in answer to your question, evolution matters because truth matters. And if we're going to start to believe fairy tales in science, then we're going to go to hell in a handbasket.
Next question from the floor, Lisa.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask. Let's assume for the moment that nowadays, like in 2009, the massive majority of qualified geologists, biologists, there's a whole field devoted to it, like evolutionary biology. Let's assume that they all pretty much concur, except for one sort of underground movement. One is forced to liken this to things like Galileo challenging the establishment in the 1600s, or indeed many other miracle scientific breakthroughs. But if you believe that that's the case, that this underground movement, which is challenging 99% of the accepted scientific worldview, the very world that has given us pretty much all our knowledge of diseases and how diseases come about, are you saying that they are either all wrong? This is millions and millions of scientists, independent, some of them, or they're all involved in some sort of anti-moral conspiracy. And I don't think I'm going out on too far a limb when I suggested that may be the case. We've seen absurd little leaflets pretending that evolution, the theory that species evolved by natural selection, gives birth to things like communism and paedophilia. And student there in one of them. So which is it? Is it a huge, massive global conspiracy against your religion? Or are they all completely wrong?
Sorry, Paul, you go first.
It's Greg, isn't it? Just a point. I don't believe in the big conspiracy or anything like that. Okay, but just looking in science in history, and Stuart raised this, that things do change. For example, spontaneous generation was a belief that was going right back to the pagan times, popular with Aristotle, right up to Charles Darwin's time, and was accepted by the majority of scientists. Okay, a minority were challenging it because they're saying no, that life comes from life. Life doesn't come from non-life. And it was particular focus was bacteria at the time of Louis Pasteur. It was 1868, 1869, something like that. He demonstrated through his pasteurization that the spontaneous generation accepted by the majority of scientists was actually wrong. So what we're saying is that just because a majority says something is right doesn't mean necessarily it is always right.
No, that was the point I was making. Because when we look back in time, when was the majority wrong? When was Galileo's majority wrong? Because of dogma. Because they thought the world was the centre of the universe purely because of basically religion and some probably elements of the pagan philosophy out which was on a roll.
Actually, it was Aristotle. It was Aristotle, actually.
Right, yeah, Aristotle. I mean, Thomas Aquinas brought back all of Aristotle's writings to fit in Aristotle's theology with Aquinas' theology. Why were the majority wrong? It's because they couldn't test and they didn't hypothesize anything that they could test. That's why they were wrong. The church in the 1600s were wrong because their idea couldn't be tested. And so when someone came along and actually said, no, this is how it works, they were blown out of the water. What are you doing now? How are you suggesting? What is your great Galileo's work? What is it? What is the miracle that you have that you can bring out that shows all these millions of people to be in completely the wrong direction?
Okay, thank you. Phil?
Okay, I think when Stuart talked about evolution branching out into all these areas, this goes into the reason why we see these different things like, say, capitalism. I would say capitalism is like Adam Smith and his unseen hand and the idea of survival of the fittest applied to economics.
Survival
Now,
has got nothing to do with
he basically said that that the most fit organisations, that they're the ones which will survive, the ones which have the and that sometimes sort of unseen hand will balance it out. Before that, Christians started off the education system, and how they actually did that, they said they took people who were destitute and they said, if we educate them, we'll give them a future. Now we're in a situation where this has been reversed, where the generation which has had their education for free are saying, actually, we don't want to fund the younger generation. We think they should pay for their own education. In hindsight, we have a generation who is in debt. And so evolution, Dawkins wrote the book, he called it The Selfish Gene. At the heart of evolution is selfishness. In the Bible it says the whole law is summed up if you love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul and all your strength, and you love your neighbour as yourself.
So swimming pool for wearing the wrong kind of fabric, but also, of course.
so that's not an answer. I can't.
Can I respond to that question too?
No,
it wasn't Galileo.
You can come back to that, then I'm going to take more questions.
Right, okay.
Okay?
The whole idea about fit things surviving and unfit things dying off wasn't Darwin that noticed that. Darwin noticed it happening in nature, but we'd known about it happening, for example, with artificial selection for thousands of years before that. This is why when people come in and say, evolution caused the Nazis and all this sort of stuff, people knew that if you kill off all the current generation of a set of people, for instance, they can't reproduce and they can't go on to have descendants. Now, this isn't evolution. Darwin showed that natural selection occurs in the real world. We've known that if you kill people, they can't have descendants since time immemorial. I can't understand why people think that it's Darwin that did this. And even if it was Darwin that caused all these things, it doesn't make evolution false.
Okay, we're going to move on now. Next question for you, sir, and then I'm looking at you, so I'll try and get to all of you. If you please could all keep your points brief from now on. Thank you.
My question is addressed at the heart of the difference between the... Did you mean him?
No, I meant you. John, I'll come to you later, okay? Sorry, start again.
The heart of the difference between the creationist position and the scientific position is that the scientific evidence says that life on Earth is descended from, if not a single individual cell, some very small population of very closely related cells somewhere way back in history. And that along the way, for example, all the animals that we're familiar with were descended, so later on there were worms, and all of the animals that we are familiar with are descended from worms according to the best scientific understanding of the situation. And what I want to know is where, if I understand correctly, your position is derived from the Christian Bible. That is to say, you're not merely creationists, but Christian creationists. Is that correct first?
Yeah.
Just to make sure I understand while I'm asking my question. Where in the Christian Bible does it say precisely that the creatures, the creation was of different lines of creatures, and that this did not take place through God arranging that they all descend from a single organism? And why is it not possible to interpret that section of the Bible in a way that is consistent with the idea of common descent?
Okay, Mark, please.
Genesis 1 and 2, and the rest will take too long to explain. But basically, God said he made everything in 6 days and all very good. And that's incompatible with evolution.
While we're on that, can I ask you?
No.
No, well, I just...
I really was interested in the answer about why that cannot be interpreted in some way consistent with common descent. Now, I agree that the 6 days constraint is quite tight, but still, I want to know why the wording is inconsistent with common descent.
Yeah, it says that when God created the plants, he said that they should reproduce according to their own kinds, with seed in them according to their kinds. And so with each of the things, it has them reproducing according to their own kinds, and they're all created in that order. So another one is that, say, God creates birds and fish on the same day. Evolution would say that fish crawled out of the sea, and then they took off from the land and became birds. Whereas in creation, you have birds and fish created before land animals. And so there's no way that one could be a metaphor of the other.
You find them in different strands. Anyway, my question is well, it's a question to you guys, right? I'm going to be a bit controversial here.
No.
I'm going to put it to you that you guys don't actually have very strong faith. Right? Here's my reasoning. Any other Christian, and the first geologists who first realised that the Earth was very, very, very old and so on, looked at the world and said, God, right enough. The Bible is wrong, and we can accommodate that because, we still believe in God, we've got faith in God, and, He wouldn't do all this to trick us and whatever. So we're going to change. And, you have what we now know as theistic evolutionists, so people who believe in God and also evolution. You guys, on the other hand, can't accept even one little thing about the Bible being wrong. I think this suggests a bit of an insecurity in your thought patterns. So you're sort of saying, if one bit's wrong, we have to throw the whole thing out. So we'll just completely ignore science and we'll ignore the weight of the evidence, and we'll say that the Bible's 100% true no matter what, and no matter what happens, no matter what evidence that comes in, we'll believe in it. I think this speaks of an insecurity in your faith, guys.
Well, that's a nice insult.
Not an insult, just
in response to your question, I'm going to respond to this gentleman's question. We accept 99% of science. It's the
No, you don't.
Yes, we do. We accept.
The foundation of science.
What that man said.
The foundation of science is that you do not base decisions on faith. You base them on evidence and reasoning.
That man.
The moment you
That man
take
there.
faith as your principle, you are abandoning science.
What he said.
I've been working in science for the last 25 years.
When was the last time you published a paper?
I've been working in the pharmaceutical industry. We don't publish many papers. But I did publish a PhD once, and I got awarded my PhD, which means I made an original contribution to science. So I know that doesn't mean everything I say is true, but it does mean that I did science once, and I convinced enough people to give me a PhD. And I know that's not a very strong argument, but I don't reject all the science. We accept 99% of science. It's that final 1% that says, this means there is no God.
Science doesn't say there's no God. Science doesn't say there's no God.
I think I've got other people to come to. Derek Green, you had a question earlier?
Mine's a question for Stuart.
Hello.
Which is can you agree with me as a humanist, which I am, that the Bible is a beautiful thing?
Oh, absolutely.
Because is it not evidence of a wonderful development of human creativity to the point where it can create wonderfully evocative storytelling and imagery in a way that we as a species find incredibly appealing?
I absolutely. There are some really beautiful parts of the Bible, like Ecclesiastes comes to mind, really nice. There also are some really boring parts of the Bible. Sorry, what?
So many versions inside the Bible. It's a big manipulation as well from the whole time, the Bible. There's so many different versions.
Oh, absolutely. There's lots of different versions. But, if you want to...
all those people who say the Bible is a beautiful thing, they haven't just read it.
Oh, they have read it. Oh, there's some beautiful parts in the Bible. Some of it, as I was about to say before I was interrupted.
I mean, if you read literature, whatever book you look at, you have to look at the whole book. And the message is just awful.
Well, the Bible's a bit different. The Bible's a bit different because it's lots and lots of books written by lots and lots of different authors. So some of it's nice and some of it's appalling. A lot of it's really quite boring. It's not as bad as the Quran. The Quran's even worse. But as far as boring goes, infidels and we don't like women and infidels. But the Bible's pretty bad at that too. To be quite honest, the Bible's pretty bad at that too. And there are some nice bits, but there are some nice bits in loads of literature, and it just shows that we can make stories up about stuff, which is a great human faculty, and we've got ideas about how it happens in psychological explanations about how creativity works and things like that. Yeah, I absolutely agree. The Bible's very nice in some places, but let's not forget that it's pretty horrible in others.
Okay, Andy, you've got a question.
Okay, it's
Oh, so many questions.
Keep it brief.
I'll keep it as brief as possible. So the gentleman claimed there that you're up to 99% of science. I know for a fact you sell telescopes. That's one of the things that you do in your shop down Leith Walk. Joshua spake to the Lord in the day the Lord delivered up the Amorites and commanded the moon and the sun to stop moving. So, as a scientist, did the sun and the moon stop moving? And A, was that because the Earth is flat and the planets, the moon and the sun do actually go round us? Or did the Earth stop revolving? Tell me, as a scientist.
I don't know. I know that it stopped moving. I know that
So
the
you
day,
believe that
I know that
moving.
the day lasted for longer than usual. I don't know how God did it, but I know that Joshua, looking up in the sky, saw the sun in the same place. Well, I can't even be sure of that, but more or less. So I can't answer your question because I can't go back in time and have a look at how it happened.
So you accept then that the interpretation of that passage then is down to how much Joshua can be trusted in his reporting of events?
I don't believe it was Joshua writing down the report, but anyway.
But so therefore it is variable, so you can interpret the Bible.
No. What happened on the long day of Joshua happened. What you read happened. There's
And
no
the sun and
question.
the moon
And
stopped
it's
moving.
quite plain and simple. There's no difficulty there.
No, as a scientist, so you believe the sun and the moon stopped moving?
Well, either the Earth stopped moving or the sun stopped moving.
Right.
But I don't know which.
So as a scientist, you're quite happy with saying that. Either the sun stops moving or the Earth stops moving.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see what the problem is.
That's fine, as a scientist.
No, as a person.
99% you said.
I don't quite see what the point is.
Okay, I'll take more questions from the floor just in a moment, just to sort of give us some balance. Do any of you have a question for Stuart? Keep it brief, please, so we can get as many people in as possible.
Yes, Stuart, you mentioned about homology as evidence for evolutionary understanding, yeah?
Yeah.
And you particularly spoke about limbs, okay? But quite, you could actually use the same thing for evidence of a common designer. For example, Phil, in his talk, he started off with jugs, his uncle had made, and you could arrange them in such a way and say, they're kind of evolved, but it was actually a common designer who used the same material but did things a little differently. Yeah. So actually, it can be argued either way. It's not argument necessarily concrete for evolutionism or creationism. It can be either 50-50.
Okay, there's two parts to this. First of all, if you found those pots, the older ones, the simpler ones, in really, really low strata, and they got progressively closer and closer and closer to the surface as they got more and more and more complex, and paleontologists could look at these fossils. What would they be called if they were pot paleontologists? Never mind, doesn't matter.
Archaeologists.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about living pots that are evolving. That's not an archaeologist. That's something weird. So these pots are evolving, right? Yeah, if you found them all in strata like that, and you'd actually looked at a pot, a complex pot, and watched it evolve, a microevolutionary change right in front of your eyes, as we could see evolution happening in front of our eyes in loads of different ways today, then that would be pretty good evidence that those pots were evolving, I think. If you have a mechanism and you know that the pots have DNA, this is getting a bit surreal, but you know that they have DNA, which every time it is copied, it has errors in it, and we know that there's a process of natural selection occurring in the world, and you find all these really simple pots at low strata and really complex pots at high strata, then that would be great evidence that these pots were evolving over a period of time. Okay, the other part about it might just be a designer. All these bones, which for some reason aren't coming up on here again, but that doesn't matter. This is my point about it being a bad scientific theory, creationism. If the bones were all the same, you could say, well, it's the same designer using it. God did it. If the bones were all different, you could say, well, this is the designer being creative. God did it. This isn't an explanation. This is just you taking your prejudice, which you've already got, and inserting it into science. This is not an explanation, whereas evolution has one explanation. All these bones are homologous because of common descent. If they weren't, if there were really weird structures happening in species that we know are very, very closely related, that would be evidence against evolution, because it's falsifiable. Creationism is, like I said at the very start of my talk, unfalsifiable, because no matter what the state of affairs with facts in the world, you could explain it by God did it. Not science.
Thank you. Who's got a question from the floor? You, sir, then Mike, and then you. Okay, can you please keep it as brief as possible? Thank you.
I'm just going to make a quick observation, actually. I'm observing that this debate seems to be, as usually seems to be the case with creationism, that the debate is over whether evolution exists. Now, evolution is a scientific-based idea. Very few of these debates seem to discuss creationism and proof that that is true. How do you respond to that? I mean, prove to me that creationism is true. If you can point to the Bible, I'll say, that's a single book. I can point you to an entire British library full of books. And there are many of those have been written that are of similar age to the Bible. Why should we not believe those rather than your particular book?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll come back on that. Paul mentioned in his talk that there are scientific facts which are in the Bible before they were known to modern science. So things like the water cycle is in Ecclesiastes. There was one person who's called it says that the water comes out of the seas, it rains down on the land, and from where it's come, it returns.
That's an absolute shocker. I mean, you couldn't possibly know that from just looking at it. I'm a creationist. I've been convinced.
Then you've got the expanding universe, but it says that God stretches out the heavens. Then you have the universe has a beginning. And so these things are in the Bible, and the Bible can't change, and it's right on these things. Again, I've looked at, in my talk, I looked at genetics, and I said, this is what we would predict to see in the genome if creation was true, and it is what we see. So there are predictions that you can make from a creationist perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. The point, can I just quickly respond to this?
Very quickly.
Exactly what I was about to say. Loads of religious books make claims that if you maybe twist them a little bit, and with the benefit of hindsight, you can say, oh look, this had it right. Now, I'd like you to make a prediction from the Bible, a scientific prediction from the Bible, which is still about to come true, and if you do, then that would maybe be evidence that the Bible had some credibility. If you go on that line, however, if you find something wrong with the Bible, like it says rabbits chew their cud, for instance, then you have to chuck it out because it's wrong. If you're going by everything in the Bible is correct, then surely if you find something wrong, then that means everything else is suspect, right? So rabbits don't chew their cud. I mean, that's a fairly simple fact of nature. And so, you've got things that you can twist and maybe look a little bit like reality, and you've got things that you can't. And it's just because it was written in a poetic fashion.
Okay, I'm really sorry, folks. We have no more time for any questions from the floor. My apologies. Could you just, 30 seconds each of you, sum up what you want to say?
You want to start? Okay, just a quick response to some of the things Stuart said. 2 slides. Surprising results.
You'll need to switch this and wait for 10 seconds.
No.
Is that not going to work? The projector's off.
No, you wouldn't have time for it. You have to.
Okay, well, I'm not going to have show you on the slide. I can just tell you what it says. Basically, 2 gentlemen, Johnson and Coffin, in 1999, Proceedings of the Natural Academy of Science, you can check with me afterwards, did some work on endogenous retroviruses, human endogenous retroviruses, and they came out with what they actually called surprising results. They were surprising because they didn't fit the evolutionary scenario. So that was one thing. And the other one I really didn't need the projector for. Oh no, I've got it back. Have we got it back?
Yeah.
Because I can't show it to you, otherwise this is a gill slit story. I just want to show you some pictures.
No, it's not on.
It's not on.
It's a quick explanation.
Just a test.
Okay, well, if you actually look at the embryos, somebody called Richardson and his team in 1997 published some work on the actual embryos, and they showed pictures and they drew diagrams to clarify it. And you can have a look at my computer later. And they are not. They show you fish with gill slits, and they show you a mammal and the gill, the pharyngeal pouches, and they do not look at all like gill slits. I'm sorry, they are not gill slits. You can have a look afterwards on my computer.
Okay, Paul, please.
I would say the area of science which is really fascinating for the future is information, and where it's going to lead us. And one of the things I've looked at recently is a work by Professor Sanford, who's called now what's the name of the book? It's called Entropy Degeneration or something like that. Basically, what we're seeing is evidence in the genetic material that we're actually degenerating. If you have a mistake, if every time you have a mutation that's supposed to bring us upwards, overall what we're seeing is a degeneration taking place. It's a bit like natural selection, that operates like brakes, but ultimately there's overall degeneration because that's to do with entropy, and that's where we're moving, which is the exact opposite of the evolutionary process.
And Phil, please, very briefly.
Okay. Darwin made two key kind of predictions in Origin of Species, and one was that fossils would be found which showed transitions, and the other was that those fossils would fit into a tree-like structure. Now what we see with modern science is that all the paleontologists are coming out and saying we don't have these transitional fossils. There are things which can be construed into transitions, just like my uncle's pots. But equally, the new scientist has to admit that the tree of life has to be torn down. What's left of Darwinism?
Stuart,
well,
conclude, please,
what's
briefly.
left of Darwinism is a beautiful explanation of how evolution happens by natural selection, but it's not just Darwinism. Evolution isn't Darwinism anymore. It's based on a Darwinian premise. Yeah, natural selection. There's loads of other stuff that happens in evolution. Genetic drift, viruses might have something to do with it. We've got great ideas about how evolution happens, and it's nothing to do with Darwin necessarily. If Darwin was wrong, it would still mean that evolution is happening because we've got 150 years of evidence that it's happening. We've got beautiful transitional fossils. I've shown you this. Go and look them up online. You can do that. Don't take my word for it. Don't take the creationist's word for it. Do the research yourself. Go on to Google and Google transitional fossils. You'll see loads of stuff which I didn't have time to cram in to my presentation today. Just to round up, I'd like to say that even the creationist worldview is so small and claustrophobic and pokey. The universe is only 6,000 years old, and that's it, and we're not going to find life anywhere else, and the species have always been the same, and all the Bible stories are true. The natural world is so much more interesting than that. We can find out so many really amazing things if we just take off our faith-based goggles and look the actual evidence that there is. We've got beautiful evidence of fossils, we've got beautiful evidence of DNA transitions, we've got beautiful evidence of how organisms are spread around the world, and it all fits in with evolution, which is pretty damn cool if you ask me. It's much more interesting than anything any religious book has ever had in it. Look at science, it's pretty damn cool. That's my new motto. Thank you.